November 18, 1942. Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. The morning humidity clung to everything as 16 Lockheed P-38 Lightning fighters of the 339th Fighter Squadron touched down on the steel matting of Henderson Field. Japanese observers, hidden in the jungle periphery, radioed their assessments back to Rabaul with barely concealed amusement. These were not the sleek interceptors they expected from America, not the nimble dogfighters that might challenge the Zero's supremacy, but massive twin-engine machines with distinctive twin booms that seemed to defy the very principles of aerial combat they had mastered. Everything about them appeared wrong to eyes trained on the elegant simplicity of the Mitsubishi A6M0, too heavy, too complex, too American in their excessive engineering. The Zero fighter had been refined to perfection through subtraction, every unnecessary gram removed, every component minimized, achieving supreme maneuverability through purity of design. Yet here, the Americans had done the opposite, added engines, added weight, added complexity. At Rabaul, the Japanese Navy's 11th Air Fleet headquarters received these reports with satisfaction. The assessment seemed to confirm what they had believed since Pearl Harbor. Americans relied on material excess because they lacked the warrior spirit that made Japanese pilots invincible. What none of them knew was that this moment would trigger the most profound transformation in Japanese naval aviation doctrine, a systematic demolition of every assumption about American capabilities through one impossible mission that would occur in just 5 months. The mathematics of aerial supremacy were about to be rewritten not in traditional dogfights, but in a new dimension of warfare the Japanese had never imagined. Long-range precision interception that would culminate in the death of their most irreplaceable asset. The gathering confidence. The dismissive attitude had begun months earlier, in August 1942, when Japanese intelligence first reported these strange new fighters appearing in the Aleutian Islands. On August 9, 1942, 2 P-38Es from the 343rd Fighter Group had shot down a pair of Japanese Kawanishi H-6K flying boats, the first Japanese aircraft destroyed by lightnings. But this distant action in the fog-shrouded Aleutians seemed irrelevant to the main theatre of operations. The initial Japanese intelligence assessment, distributed to fighter units in September 1942, reflected institutional overconfidence. The report stated that the twin-engine design represented American tendency toward mechanical complexity over combat efficiency, and predicted that such aircraft will prove inferior to our fighters in all combat situations requiring maneuverability. Among the officers reviewing these reports was Commander Minoru Genda, the tactical genius behind the Pearl Harbor attack. His assessment, recorded in official Navy documents, stated, "The Americans, having failed to match our Zero with conventional fighters, now resort to unconventional designs. Every additional component is another point of failure. The Zero was born from the warrior philosophy of maximum result from minimum material. These American machines represent the opposite philosophy." The initial encounters seemed to confirm Japanese confidence. When P-38s began operating from Guadalcanal in November 1942, Japanese pilots reported that the American fighters appeared reluctant to engage in traditional dogfights. This was interpreted as fear rather than tactics. The first disturbing signs. November 18, 1942, marked the first combat between P-38s and Japanese fighters over Guadalcanal. Pilots of the 339th Fighter Squadron, escorting Boeing B-17 bombers, claimed 3 Japanese aircraft destroyed. While modest, this engagement demonstrated something new. The P-38s had refused to be drawn into turning fights, instead making high-speed passes from altitude. But it was December 27, 1942, that provided the first serious shock. 12 P-38s from the 39th Fighter Squadron encountered a Japanese force over Dobodura, New Guinea. The engagement was brief but decisive. The P-38s, maintaining altitude advantage and refusing to engage in maneuver combat, destroyed multiple Japanese aircraft while suffering minimal losses. The Japanese Navy's 4th Air Group War Diary, captured after the war, recorded growing concern. December 1942. The twin-engine fighters appear over our bases at altitudes we struggle to reach. When our fighters climb to engage, they dive through our formations at exceptional speed, fire, and climb away before we can respond effectively. The most troubling aspect for Japanese pilots was the P-38's apparent immunity to traditional tactics. The Zero's legendary maneuverability, which had dominated every opponent since China, seemed irrelevant against an enemy that refused to turn. The intelligence failure. The Japanese intelligence assessment of the P-38, revised in January 1943, still reflected dangerous underestimation. The report, distributed to all fighter units, stated, "The Lockheed twin-engine fighter represents American industrial philosophy rather than combat effectiveness. Assessment indicates maximum speed, estimated 350 miles per hour. Service ceiling, approximately 30,000 feet. Range, 500 to 600 miles. Armament, machine guns in nose mounting. Tactical assessment. This aircraft's weight and complexity make it vulnerable to our fighters in traditional combat. Pilots should force close-range engagements where our superiority is absolute." The reality was starkly different. The P-38G models arriving in the Pacific could achieve 400 miles per hour in level flight, climb to 40,000 feet, and with drop tanks, strike targets over 1,000 miles away. The concentrated firepower of 4.50 caliber machine guns and 120mm cannon in the nose provided devastating accuracy. By January 1943, American pilots had developed tactics specifically designed to exploit the P-38's advantages. Major John Mitchell, who would later lead the Yamamoto mission, was refining these tactics with the 339th Fighter Squadron. The fundamental rule was simple: never surrender the energy advantage to engage in maneuver combat with Japanese fighters. The Bismarck Sea Revelation, March 2nd to 4th, 1943. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea provided evidence that should have shattered Japanese complacency. P-38S flew top cover as American and Australian bombers annihilated a Japanese convoy attempting to reinforce Lae. 8 transport ships and 4 destroyers were sunk. The P-38s claimed numerous aerial victories while successfully protecting the attacking bombers. Japanese survivor accounts recorded in post-war interrogations described the P-38s maintaining station at altitudes the Zero escort struggled to reach. When the Japanese fighters finally climbed to engagement altitude, they found themselves at an energy disadvantage that proved fatal. But even this disaster was rationalized in Japanese reports. The official assessment blamed numerical inferiority and surprise rather than acknowledging American technological and tactical superiority. This institutional denial would persist until it was too late. The fatal miscalculation. April 1st, 1943. Operation I-Go, Admiral Yamamoto's massive aerial counteroffensive, was launched from Rabaul. The campaign was intended to crush American airpower in the Solomons and demonstrate continued Japanese superiority. Yamamoto himself had come forward to direct operations personally. The results of Operation One-Go were catastrophically misreported to Japanese high command. Pilots claimed fantastic victories, dozens of American aircraft destroyed, multiple ships sunk. The actual American losses were minimal, while Japanese aircraft losses, many to P-38s, were substantial. It was in this atmosphere of false confidence that Yamamoto made his fatal decision to conduct an inspection tour of forward bases, a decision that would place him within range of American P-38s operating from Guadalcanal. The intercepted message, April 13, 1943. American radio intercept stations copied a Japanese naval message in the JN-25D cipher. After hours of work, cryptanalysts at Pearl Harbor decoded a detailed itinerary for Admiral Yamamoto's inspection tour. The message specified that on April 18th, the Commander-in-Chief would depart Rabaul at 0600 via medium bomber, escorted by 6 fighters, with precise arrival times at various bases. The intelligence was immediately forwarded to Admiral Chester Nimitz, who made the decision to attempt an interception. The only aircraft in the American arsenal capable of the mission was the P-38 Lightning. The interception point would be 400 miles from Guadalcanal, at the extreme limit of the P-38's range even with drop tanks. The mission planning. April 17, 1943. Major John Mitchell of the 339th Fighter Squadron was tasked with planning the interception. The route would have to be 600 miles to avoid Japanese-held islands and coast watcher positions, flying at wave-top height to avoid radar detection. 18 P-38s would fly the mission, 4 designated as the killer flight to attack the bombers, 12 as top cover to handle the Zero escorts, and 2 spares. The pilots selected included Captain Thomas Lanphier Jr., Lieutenant Rex Barber, Lieutenant Besby Holmes, and Lieutenant Raymond Hine for the killer flight. Mitchell's navigation would have to be perfect. There would be no margin for error in fuel consumption, no opportunity for a second pass. The entire engagement would have to be completed in minutes. The interception. April 18, 1943. 0710 hours. 16 P-38s took off from Guadalcanal's Fighter II strip. 2 had mechanical problems. They flew for 2 hours and 20 minutes at 50 feet above the ocean, maintaining complete radio silence, navigating by compass and clock alone. At 0934, exactly as planned, Lieutenant Doug Canning spotted the Japanese formation, 2 Mitsubishi G-4M Betty bombers, in trail with 6 Zero escorts weaving above them. Mitchell's navigation had been perfect. Captain Lanphier and Lieutenant Barber dropped their belly tanks and climbed to attack. What happened next remains one of the most analysed moments in aviation history. Both pilots would claim to have shot down Yamamoto's bomber, but post-war analysis of Japanese records and crash site evidence indicates Barber's guns found their mark. The lead bomber's right engine exploded. The wings separated. The aircraft carrying Admiral Yamamoto plunged into the jungle canopy of Bougainville. The second bomber, carrying Vice Admiral Matome Ugaki, was also shot down but crashed in the water. Ugaki survived. Only 1 P-38 was lost, Lieutenant Raymond Hine, last seen with a Zero on his tail heading out to sea. The shattering impact. April 18, 1943. 1400 hours. Rabaul. When the surviving Zeros returned and reported the ambush, Japanese naval headquarters initially refused to believe Yamamoto could be dead. A search party found the wreckage the next day. Yamamoto's body, thrown clear of the aircraft, had been killed instantly by 2.50 caliber bullets. The psychological impact on the Japanese Navy was devastating. Yamamoto was not just a commander, but a symbol of Japanese naval superiority. That he could be hunted and killed at a precise time and place chosen by the Americans demonstrated a level of intelligence gathering and operational capability the Japanese had not imagined possible. Captain Watanabe, who led the recovery party, reported, "The Admiral was found still gripping his ceremonial sword. He maintained dignity even in death. But the precision of the American attack, appearing at exactly the right moment, at exactly the right place, this shattered our confidence completely." The intelligence revolution. The successful interception of Yamamoto forced a complete re-evaluation of the P-38 within Japanese naval aviation. A new assessment, issued May 1, 1943, marked most urgent, all units, revealed the scale of previous miscalculations. Previous assessments of the Lockheed Type L fighter are hereby rescinded. Based on combat analysis and the events of April 18th, actual capabilities are assessed as maximum speed, exceeds 400 miles per hour. Service ceiling, exceeds 40,000 feet. Combat range, exceeds 1,000 miles with auxiliary tanks. Armament, concentrated firepower vastly exceeding initial estimates. climb rate, superior to all Japanese fighters above 15,000 feet. Critical warning. This aircraft represents capabilities beyond previous experience. Avoid combat unless possessing clear tactical advantage. The Tactical Revolution, May 1943, brought fundamental changes to Japanese fighter tactics, all driven by the P-38 threat. The Imperial Japanese Navy issued new combat directives that reversed years of doctrine when engaging twin-engine American fighters. Do not attempt to match their climb above 20,000 feet. Do not follow them in high-speed dives. Attack only when they are committed to ground attack or bomber escort. Disengage if they maintain altitude advantage. These directives represented a complete reversal of Japanese fighter philosophy, which had always emphasized aggressive engagement and spiritual superiority over material factors. The accumulating losses. Throughout 1943, the P-38 systematically destroyed Japanese air power in the Solomons and New Guinea. The toll on experienced pilots was catastrophic. Unlike American pilots who often survived being shot down thanks to rescue operations and the P-38's ability to return on one engine, Japanese pilot losses were usually fatal. By September 1943, most of Japan's pre-war trained pilots were dead. Their replacements, rushed through abbreviated training programs, lacked both the skills and experience to compete with increasingly proficient American P-38 pilots. The statistics were damning. Average Japanese pilot flight hours before combat, 1943, 200. Average American P-38 pilot flight hours, 1943, 400 plus. Japanese pilot survival rate after 10 missions, 40%. American P-38 pilot survival rate after 10 missions, 80%. The Bomber Offensive, October 1943. The P-38s revealed another dimension of their superiority, the ability to escort bombers at ranges no Japanese fighter could match. B-24 Liberators, previously vulnerable to interception, now struck targets throughout the Japanese defensive perimeter with P-38 escorts that could remain with them for entire missions. The mathematics were relentless. Each P-38 could escort bombers on 1,000-mile missions. The Zero's maximum combat radius, even with a drop tank, was 600 miles. This meant American bombers could strike from bases beyond Japanese retaliation range while still enjoying fighter protection. The Charles Lindbergh factor. In 1944, Charles Lindbergh, flying as a civilian technical representative, arrived in the Pacific to teach P-38 pilots improved cruise control techniques. His methods increased the P-38's combat radius significantly. Some sources indicate up to 30% improvement in range. Lindbergh also demonstrated the P-38's effectiveness as a fighter bomber, showing pilots how to deliver bombs with precision while maintaining fighter performance. This versatility further widened the gap between American and Japanese capabilities. The Marianas Turkey Shoot, June 1944. The Battle of the Philippine Sea demonstrated how completely the balance had shifted. While F-6F Hellcats bore the brunt of the fighter combat, P-38s operating from land bases provided long-range cover and reconnaissance that helped orchestrate what became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Japanese naval aviation, which had once been the world's elite, was slaughtered. The few surviving Japanese pilots reported that American fighters, including P-38s, seemed to be everywhere at once, always with altitude advantage, always with superior numbers. The Ace Race. Throughout 1944, American P-38 pilots in the Pacific competed in what they called the Ace Race. The statistics tell the story Major Richard Bong, 40 victories, all in P-38s. Major Thomas Maguire, 38 victories, all in P-38s. Colonel Charles MacDonald, 27 victories. Lieutenant Colonel Gerald Johnson, 22 victories. These scores, achieved in roughly 2 years of combat, exceeded the victory totals of most surviving Japanese aces who had been flying since 1937. The P-38 had become not just a fighter but an ace-making machine. The final assessment. By 1945, Japanese naval aviation had effectively ceased to exist as a fighting force. The P-38, along with other American fighters, had systematically destroyed not just aircraft, but the entire institutional knowledge of Japanese naval aviation. A post-war Japanese technical evaluation revealed how completely they had misjudged American engineering philosophy. The P-38 represented design concepts we failed to comprehend. Redundancy over simplicity, twin engines providing survival capability. Energy tactics over maneuver tactics. Firepower concentration over dispersion. Multi-role capability over specialization. Pilot protection over weight savings. Every feature we dismissed as excessive proved decisive in actual combat. The numbers that tell the story. The final statistics of the P-38 in the Pacific Theater. Japanese aircraft destroyed by P-38s. Total confirmed, over 1,800 Japanese aircraft, including Admiral Yamamoto's G-4M on April 18, 1943. P-38, production, total produced, 10,037 aircraft. Peak production, over 400 per month in 1944. Mission statistics, total P-38 sorties in Pacific, over 65,000. Types, fighter sweep, bomber escort, ground attack, reconnaissance. Average mission range, 600 plus miles. The Yamamoto mission impact, according to post-war Japanese assessments, morale impact, devastating and irreversible. Strategic effect, loss of Japan's most capable naval strategist. Psychological impact, demonstrated no Japanese leader was beyond American reach. The industrial reality. The production comparison revealed the futility of Japanese resistance. While Japan struggled to produce 300 to 400 fighters monthly of all types combined, Lockheed alone was producing over 400 P-38s per month at peak production. Additionally, America was simultaneously mass-producing P-51 Mustangs, P-47 Thunderbolts, F-6F Hellcats, and F-4U Corsairs. More critically, each American aircraft was produced using assembly line techniques that ensured consistent quality and incorporated continuous improvements based on combat experience. Japanese aircraft, increasingly built by conscripted labor using inferior materials, suffered from declining quality as the war progressed. The pilot training catastrophe. The most decisive factor was pilot training. American P-38 Training Program 1944. Initial flight training, 200 plus hours. Advanced training, 100 plus hours. P-38 specific training, 50 plus hours. Total before combat, 400 plus hours. Japanese pilot training, 1944. Total flight time before combat, 100 to 150 hours. Often less than 20 hours on type. No fuel for extensive training. Instructors pulled for combat duty. The result was predictable. American P-38 pilots arrived in combat with extensive training and joined squadrons with experienced veterans who passed on combat wisdom. Japanese pilots arrived barely able to fly formation and were often killed on their first missions. The strategic impact. The P-38's long range fundamentally altered Pacific strategy. Japanese planning documents from 1944 reveal how the P-38's reach constrained their operations. All fleet movements must account for P-38 reconnaissance and strike capability. Daylight operations within their range invite destruction. This restricts our operational flexibility to an intolerable degree. The Japanese Navy's inability to operate freely in daylight within P-38 range, which by 1944 meant most of the Western Pacific, fundamentally altered the war's dynamics. The technology gap. By late 1944, the P-38J and L models had addressed every deficiency identified in combat. Improved engines, hydraulically boosted ailerons, better cockpit heating, and dive brakes made the Lightning superior in every performance regime. Meanwhile, Japan struggled to maintain production of the obsolescent Zero, with no resources to develop or produce more advanced designs in meaningful numbers. Late-war Japanese fighters, like the N1K2J George and Kai-84 Frank, were excellent designs but arrived too late and in too few numbers to matter. The testimony of survivors. Post-war interrogations of surviving Japanese pilots revealed the complete transformation in their perception of the P-38, Lieutenant Commander Sadamu Komachi, interviewed in 1946. We began the war believing our spirit and skill were superior to American materialism. The P-38 proved that properly employed technology defeats spirit. You cannot fight physics with courage. Captain Takeo Tanamizu, 32 victories, survived the war. The P-38 was not the best turning fighter, not the fastest, not the highest flying, but it was good enough at everything, and it was everywhere. We called them twin-tailed shadows because they seemed to be waiting wherever we flew. The legacy evaluation. In 1962, at a joint US-Japanese aviation history symposium, veterans from both sides discussed the P-38's impact. Former Captain Minoru Genda, by then a member of Japan's parliament, admitted, "The P-38 was the first clear signal that we had fundamentally misunderstood modern war. When it killed Admiral Yamamoto, it killed more than a man. It killed our entire concept of warfare. We thought wars were won by superior warriors. The Americans proved wars are won by superior systems." Former Major John Mitchell, who led the Yamamoto mission, responded, "We couldn't build a fighter that could outturn a Zero. So we built one that didn't need to. That's the American way. If you can't win their game, change the game entirely." The final testament. At a 1985 reunion of Pacific Theater veterans in Hawaii, surviving Japanese naval aviator Kenji Yanagiya, who had flown escort for Admiral Yamamoto, delivered these remarks. "We dismissed your P-38 in 1942 because we measured it by our standards. We valued elegance. You valued effectiveness. We sought perfection in one dimension. You sought adequacy in all dimensions. We built the ultimate sword. You built a gun that made swords irrelevant." The killing of Admiral Yamamoto was not just a successful mission, it was a demonstration. The message was that America could reach anywhere, strike anyone, with an aircraft we had dismissed as impossible. But the greatest lesson was this. The P-38 taught us that modern war is not about individual excellence, but about systems, not about warrior spirit, but about industrial capacity, not about elegant solutions, but about practical ones. We laughed at the P-38 in 1942. By April 18, 1943, it had killed our greatest admiral. By 1944, it owned our skies. The laughter stopped forever when we realized we were not fighting pilots. We were fighting an entire industrial system that could produce quality in quantity. To the men who flew the Lightning, you didn't just win a war. You changed how wars would be fought forever. Epilogue. The numbers that matter. Admiral Yamamoto's death on April 18, 1943, marked more than the loss of a brilliant strategist. It marked the moment when Japanese naval aviation's fate was sealed. The P-38 Lightning had demonstrated that American intelligence, planning and technology could reach out across vast distances to strike with surgical precision. The 16 P-38s that took off from Guadalcanal that morning carried more than guns and fuel. They carried the message that the age of industrial warfare had arrived. Wars would no longer be won by the courage of individual warriors, but by the capacity to produce superior weapons in overwhelming numbers, train pilots systematically, and employ technology intelligently. From November 1942, when Japanese commanders first laughed at the ungainly twin-boomed fighters arriving at Guadalcanal, to April 1943, when those same fighters killed their most important leader. To 1945, when P-38s roamed freely over the Japanese home islands, the transformation was complete. The Japanese had laughed at complexity, only to discover it was sophistication. They had mocked excess, only to learn it was abundance. They had dismissed the P-38 as too American, too big, too complicated, too mechanical, only to find that these very qualities made it perfect for the kind of war America intended to fight. The laughter had lasted 5 months. The consequences would last forever. The P-38. Lightning didn't just shoot down Admiral Yamamoto on April 18, 1943. It shot down an entire philosophy of warfare, proving that in modern conflict, the assembly line beats the samurai sword, the slide rule beats the warrior spirit, and industrial mathematics beats individual courage. They laughed at the P-38 Lightning until it shot Yamamoto from the sky. After that, the only sound was the drone of twin Allison engines, carrying American power wherever it chose to go, whenever it chose to strike. The lightning had struck, and the age of the samurai was over. The American century had begun. The 16 P-38s that killed Yamamoto flew 435 miles from Guadalcanal, navigated by compass and clock, intercepted their target within 1 minute of the planned time, completed their mission in less than 10 minutes of combat, and returned with the loss of only 1 aircraft. This was not luck. This was not coincidence. This was American planning, training, and technology functioning exactly as designed. The Japanese commanders who had laughed at the P-38 in November 1942 learned the hardest lesson of modern warfare. Never mistake different for inferior, never confuse complexity for weakness, and never laugh at the future when it arrives on twin engines, armed with American firepower and aimed by American intent. The P-38 Lightning had the last laugh, and it echoed across the Pacific until the rising sun finally set on August 15, 1945.